Boomer Von Cannon, WBT.
Huh? It's 5:05, and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Thanks for spending some time with us. We continue this morning tracking devastation in the western half of our state, and unfortunately this morning, we've been talking about it all week, the death toll continues to rise. There have been 57 confirmed deaths in Buncombe County. That's for the latest details from officials released yesterday afternoon. Officials also reporting there are over 1,100 individuals that are in shelters through North Carolina, and 57,000 people have applied for FEMA assistance. There are currently aircrafts flying in and around Asheville, according to Major General Todd Hunt. There are 800 National Guardsmen currently working as part of the recovery, and President Joe Biden will be in the state today to survey the damage and destruction in the mountains of western North Carolina. On Sunday, the president did approve Governor Roy Cooper's request for a federal major disaster declaration. That is helping to provide immediate federal help to 25 counties in western North Carolina and the eastern band of Cherokee Indians. Also noting nationally, looking at other states in the region impacted by the storm, the death total from Hurricane Helene currently stands at 165. That's 165 total deaths from Hurricane Helene, as it ranks up there as one of the deadliest hurricanes to ever impact the United States. Yesterday, Agriculture Commissioner Steve Troxler, alongside Senators Thom Tillis and Ted Budd, with U.S. House Representatives David Rouzer, Greg Murphy, and Chuck Edwards, all talked about ongoing relief efforts, storm damage, and the community needs. Senator Ted Budd talked about the resiliency of parts of western North Carolina.
As we're renowned for here in the state, we're resilient, particularly the mountain regions here. Just amazing people that are largely self-sustaining. But part of my job as an elected official from the federal government is to bring as many resources as quickly as possible to cut through bureaucracy. That's what they sent us to Washington for. And so far, in an unprecedented situation, we're seeing tremendous coordination. There's a lot of work to do. Again, there's the immediate things. It's saving life and limb, and then it's getting resources as quickly as possible and getting folks what they need.
That's U.S. Senator Ted Budd in Asheville yesterday. Keeping on that thread, the North Carolina State Board of Elections held a press availability yesterday as it talked about its voting operations as we sit here 34 days ahead of Election Day in western North Carolina following the damage from Helene. Despite the storm's impact, election officials are ensuring the security and integrity of the upcoming election. Emergency measures including rescheduling absentee board meetings, deploying emergency kits to affected communities, as well as assessing polling sites for damage and looking at the start of early voting are continuing. That process, as you can imagine, is still under the assessment period this morning. Voters can rely on existing protocols for absentee ballots, ID exemptions, and provisional voting during storm-related issues. Election integrity remains a priority, with the results all expected to be coming in on November the 5th. The Board of Elections Executive Director Karen Brinson Bell said at the briefing yesterday, the mountain people are strong, and the election people who serve them are resilient and tough. Just go back to 2020 when we had an incredibly successful election with record turnout during the COVID pandemic. We've battled through hurricanes and tropical storms and still held safe and secure elections, and we will do everything in our power to do the same again. Obviously, still an unfolding situation out west, learning details every day as various communities and towns, cities, and counties updated information for the public. We'll continue to track those details, and Andy Jackson from the John Locke Foundation will have some more details coming up a little bit later on this morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's 5:10 on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. quickly. The vice presidential debate took place last night in New York City. That was hosted by CBS News. There was a question about upcoming storms. The question was phrased as, what are you going to do about climate change? J.D. Vance, the Republican senator from Ohio, who is the running mate of former President Donald Trump, got the question first. He talked about the hurricane and hurricane relief to start off his comments.
Because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today, actually, a photograph of two grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster.
That's J.D. Vance in New York City last night during the CBS vice presidential debate, the one and only debate that will be taking place for the VP candidates. The question was then asked of the Democrat vice presidential nominee, the governor, Tim Walz. His response.
It is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane, and my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together to all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover, but we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused.
And that focus does continue this morning as crews from across the United States make their way in and around the Asheville area. That's essentially the main staging area that's taking place out in the western half of North Carolina to continue the search and rescue operations that do continue in many of these hard-hit and devastated counties. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, President Joe Biden will be in the state today to survey damage. He is apparently flying into the Raleigh-Durham Airport. From there, he will likely jump on a helicopter, survey some of that damage, and then not sure whether he is or is not making a stop in Asheville to talk with officials on the ground as the federal response to this unbelievably damaging and destructive hurricane/tropical storm continues across the western half of North Carolina. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 5:13 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Let's get a look at your early morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Nick, we're looking great.
99.3
WBT.
Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, 519, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Continuing our coverage of devastation in the western half of North Carolina. A quick update on power outages. It seems like we may have hit a little bit of a plateau. As we were on the air yesterday morning, there were 377,000 customers without power, and unfortunately this morning, the number still stands at 350,000. Compare and contrast that to the recovery efforts that were made between Monday and Tuesday morning when we were with you. The number was around 457,000 Monday morning. They were able to get almost 100,000 customers back online. Looking at the totals between yesterday and today, only about 27,000 additional customers added. Better than nothing, but as we have heard from many folks, infrastructure completely decimated in the western half of North Carolina. We'll continue to track that. A strike is ongoing this morning involving the International Longshoremen's Association, and it is apparently affecting over 36 U.S. ports, including North Carolina's Port of Wilmington. In response to that, the North Carolina Port Authority has activated a contingency plan. The strike stems from a dispute over wage increases and automation protections. The strike could disrupt the economy, which concerns about potential supply chain issues and higher prices, particularly as we get closer to the holiday shopping season. The ports of Wilmington and Morehead City have implemented various restrictions on cargo handling until the situation is resolved. The impact will depend on the duration. President Joe Biden, under the powers granted by the Taft-Hartley Act, could step in and order an 80-day cooling-off period that would at least temporarily halt the stoppage, although as of this point, there's been little indication that he will do so. It's estimated by various economists that the U.S. port strike could cost the United States between $3 and $5 billion per day. You can read more on that story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. 521 now on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Political controversies surrounding Lieutenant Governor and gubernatorial candidate Mark Robinson do continue less than 35 days ahead of Election Day. David Larson, the opinion editor over at carolinajournal.com, joins us this morning with the latest. David, good morning to you. Appreciate the time. Can you give us a broad overview of the Mark Robinson situation, where we stand right now, and how all this is kind of shaking out?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nick. Well, basically, CNN had some opposition research maybe given to them, or they did a little bit of their own poking around and were able to uncover a bunch of rather salacious, as some called it, disturbing, some others might have called it, posts from a while back. You know, these were from before, largely before Robinson had any political clout or had given his speech to the Greensboro City Council. But a lot of them, you know, were disturbing to people, involved sexual activity, racial comments, things like that. And so they posted that, and since that time, you know, Robinson has had to respond to that, and he has said, you know, this was AI, or this wasn't his words, and other people were not as convinced by that. So, you know, many Republicans have kind of felt themselves in a position where they had to either come down one way or the other on it. You know, either they would say they distance themselves from him, or some others have maybe bought themselves time by saying Robinson said he, you know, this wasn't him, he didn't do this, so, you know, he should be able to prove this to people. And Robinson wasn't able to prove it to his own staff, both lieutenant governor staff or his campaign staff, who have largely, I believe, majority of staff of both of those offices have left. So he wasn't able to convince them, but there are some who, I think for good reason, do not have a lot of trust in the media, because, you know, left-leaning media have had these big stories, or, you know, like the Hunter Biden one, they've tried to put the wraps on other stories. So I think a lot in the conservative base, they don't automatically assume this is the case. So that's kind of where we are now. There's a lot of Republican politicians and conservative voters who are trying to figure out, what does this mean? You know, Robinson's not going anywhere. He's going to be on the ballot. It's too late for a switch like happened with the Democrats at the top of their ticket. So he's going to be the candidate on the ballot, and we'll see where the chips fall, and different people are reacting in different ways to that.
There's two different places I want to take this. I want to first start off with the comments you made about people not trusting media. This is not necessarily a new issue, but I've seen Gallup polls and Pew Research polls, David, that show that the public's trust, not just Republicans, not just conservatives, but the public's trust in traditional media outlets, like of which CNN would fall into, continues to be at record lows. They publish a lot of these stories, and there are folks that will never believe some of the reporting, and a lot of that is because of CNN and other agencies' failures in the past to run with verifiably fake stories.
I think the media, a lot of the mainstream sources, have been outed recently as not being mainstream, not being middle of the road, or they shot themselves in the foot with their credibility. So something like this they come out with, and they get people to independently verify it. They figure all that out, but then people just aren't willing to believe them because they've been burned so many times, or even just that when they choose a certain story, the one they're choosing to run with is one that attacks a certain side of the aisle and not another. So it is should be a concern to those sources, the mainstream sources. But thankfully, we live in an age where there's Carolina Journal, there's there's different sides to keep different people accountable and to give different perspectives. So it's good in that way, and that if one group continuously shoots their credibility down, then there's other people that can point at that. I think there was a time with Walter Cronkite or Ted Brokaw. There's only like a couple people, and people just took their word as gospel. And it's a much different era in terms of media. There's so many options, and if you find out one's lying, many other places to go.
We live in an age now where younger individuals are starting to get involved in politics. Many of those individuals grew up on the internet. David, I see a future where online comments, regardless of the level of extreme that they are, kind of become normal place in American politics when you've had individuals that have been on the internet since they were 10 years old, commenting and posting things online. Is there a certain point where this just becomes the norm in regards to politics 20 or 30 years down the road?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know where that'll go. I think it might become the norm that everybody's said weird things, everybody's done weird things. Kind of like, that mutually assured destruction that they used to talk about with nuclear engagement, where, well, if we attacked Russia, they would attack us. And so nobody's going to shoot a nuclear bomb. Maybe in the future, nobody would want to bring something up, because by you bringing something up, maybe the other side would turn up a bunch of stuff on you. But I think it's definitely the case that people who run for office, they didn't necessarily think when they were a teenager, stealing their parents' liquor and posting stupid things online, that they were going to have to have a press conference over something they put on social media at that age. They thought they were just having fun, and then all that stuff comes out. So I think we'll have to be a little bit more forgiving, maybe understanding of, we all have those stupid things we've thought and said, and now it's all verifiable. It's not like you're just 100 years ago off in the woods with your friends. It's like everything, a lot of what you said and thought back in times where you weren't as mature is going to be up. But I think the other, maybe a benefit to it, is people who, it wasn't just a phase, but they were thinking and believing and saying pretty reprehensible things far after their young adulthood or teens and into their professional career. It might be a way to weed out some of that too, where your character is going to be harder to hide if you're a sleazebag, if you're somebody who cheats their business partners or says things that are, most people wouldn't want to vote for. That's going to be out there too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I think.
David Larson joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 528 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Time for a look at the roads this morning. Boomer Von Cannon's got the latest.
All right, Nick, we're up and running on this.
expert tree care specialist for WPT and for you.
Hot. 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Also streaming live this morning on the Carolina Journal YouTube channel. We continue to track details out of Western North Carolina this morning, and unfortunately the death toll, well, it continues to rise. As of an update yesterday afternoon from officials in Buncombe County, that's where Asheville is located, there have been 57 confirmed deaths in that county. According to officials in the area, there are more than 1,100 people in shelters throughout North Carolina, and over 57,000 individuals have applied for FEMA assistance. When we take a look at the death count in the Southeast as a whole, that number currently sits at 167. As I noted, 57 in Buncombe County, 5 so far reported in Henderson County, 4 in Haywood County, 1 in Catawba, 1 in Gaston County. So we're continuing to track those details as crews continue to bring supplies into the area. There were over 800 National Guardsmen working as part of the recovery. President Joe Biden will be flying into the Raleigh airport today. From there, he will make his way out to the mountains of North Carolina to survey that devastation firsthand. On Sunday, the president approved Governor Roy Cooper's request for a federal major disaster declaration. That was to help provide an immediate federal assistance to 25 counties in North Carolina, as well as the eastern band of Cherokee Indians. Yesterday in the area, officials, including Agriculture Commissioner Steve Troxler, as well as Senators Thom Tillis and Ted Budd, U.S. Representatives David Rouzer, Greg Murphy, and Chuck Edwards, all talked about the efforts and the damage and the community needs. Senator Budd highlighted the extensive damage that was done to the communication across the western half of the state.
This is absolutely unprecedented. Communications down, cell towers down. Just one of the mobile carriers had lost 303 towers. Within 24 hours, they had about half of those up and running, but they knew that they would hit a plateau because they get more and more difficult as they go into far reaches of western North Carolina.
That's U.S. Senator with the John Locke Foundation's got the latest details this morning. Andy, a rough situation for folks out in the western half of the state. We heard from the election director yesterday. The election will go on. What are you tracking this morning?
Yeah, well, the election has to go on because you can't have, votes coming in after election day when people know the results elsewhere. There really isn't a choice on that. We do know that the state board has met. There's probably going to be a lot of ongoing meetings. They're going to do what they can. They're getting information from the county boards in the affected areas in the mountains and the foothills. And they have already, the State Board of Elections has already authorized county boards not to conduct or to change how they conduct absentee ballot processing. Today is the first day, yesterday was the first day where they were supposed to start processing absentee ballots all over the state. In those counties, they can do it at a later time. And that shouldn't have a huge impact on how the vote is conducted because they're going to have time. They have another 4 weeks after this in order to get those absentee ballots done. The big question is, how much direction is the General Assembly going to give the State Board of Elections before they have to do another round of decisions about what the county should do in those areas?
Well, and one of the things that might be important to note for folks, especially new voters here in the state of North Carolina, our elections are not centrally run, right? They're run by each independent county, 100 county board of elections. So there is a little bit of autonomy there, but Andy, you can't not look at those pictures and look at the roads wiped out and entire towns that are now gone and wonder, is voting even on these people's minds as they try and pick up the pieces out west? To me, that's even a more interesting discussion rather than do they have a place to vote?
Right. I mean, and there's a whole hierarchy of needs involved there. First, you need to get people to safety. You need to give them water. You need to give them food. You need to give them shelter. And then once you've done a couple of other things down the list, then we start worrying about voting. And I think that's the issue here. A lot of these county governments, the priority is not dealing with voter registration or getting ready for the vote right now. Is just to see who's still alive and see who they can get to. They are going to get to this. They have to get to this, but it's really going to be a matter of when can they kind of get to that next step. I do expect that the General Assembly is going to pass some emergency measures. And as part of that bill, whenever they do meet next, there's at least the House is already scheduled to come back next week. Maybe the Senate will join them and they'll be able to pass a bill. Similar to what we had with Hurricane Florence in 2018, the General Assembly passed a bill that, among other things, authorized those counties in the affected areas to change their early voting locations and also their election day locations. That's something that they're going to need from the county government. Now, in theory, the State Board of Elections could do that, but given some of the experience that has happened with the last time the State Board of Elections dealt with an emergency, which is what they defined as COVID-19, I don't think the General Assembly wants to leave that up to the State Board.
Andy Jackson joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. A lot of absentee ballots have already been sent out. You can imagine some folks in the western half of the state don't have access to those anymore. What's the process for that if you request an absentee ballot and lose it, aren't able to fill it out? Are you still able to vote on Election Day or during early voting?
Yes, you're still able to vote. Basically, you would spoil the ballot. If you do get a ballot and you decide, well, I'm not going to send it in, just tear it up, into tiny little pieces, throw it in the trash. If you never get it, and there's certainly a possibility that mail facilities have been wiped out and that you're not going to end up with the ballot you requested. As long as you have not submitted that ballot and it hasn't been processed already, you can go into an early voting location or an election day voting location and vote. And if for some reason your ballot comes to you later after you've already voted in person, once again, just tear it up because you have already voted. You can always check. There are places you can check. There's ballot tracks. I don't have the URL in front of me, but Google ballot tracks. The State Board of Election has a link where you can kind of see where your ballot is. But yeah, there's always that option to vote in person, even if you have an absentee ballot, you just don't want to vote absentee this year.
Now, there is an electronic voting system that has just been used for folks overseas where it's not practical to mail somebody a paper ballot and have them mail it back. Have you heard any discussion? Is that a possibility for folks out in the West?
I'm not aware of it. And I will say that I would not be for it. Because even people that deal in that realm, people that talk about, hey, you do online banking and whatnot. I mean, banks and whatnot, they have insurance to cover all the losses they have from electronic theft that goes on. We keep hearing about hacking that goes on in people's personal information. And most of us have gotten notices from companies saying that your personal information has been stolen through hackers. It's not a secure system. The only reason we can really do that for military and overseas voters is that it's such a small subset of voters and they're spread out all over the place that it's kind of an acceptable risk. I certainly wouldn't want to have a situation where you're having an unsecure, compared to any other way you can vote, a less secure system. So I haven't heard it, and I don't expect they'll bring it up.
Andy Jackson joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 5:43, now 5:44, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for a look at your Wednesday commute. Boomer Von Cannon's got the latest in traffic.
All right, Nick, we're in great shape.
your emergency situation station.
550 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. We are getting additional details out of Western North Carolina this morning, including, unfortunately, an update in the amount of confirmed deaths. Buncombe County officials in a press conference yesterday afternoon confirmed 57 deaths in that county due to impacts of Tropical Storm and Hurricane Helene. Currently, there are more than 1,100 people in shelters throughout North Carolina, and over 57,000 people have applied for FEMA assistance. Aircraft moving in and out of the area. Parts of Asheville have become essentially the staging area to get supplies out to the rest of the western half of the state. Over 800 National Guardsmen are working as part of recovery efforts, and the president, Joe Biden, will be in the area today to survey the devastation out in the mountains. Agricultural Commissioner Steve Troxler, U.S. Senator Thom Tillis, Ted Budd, as well as Representatives David Rouser, Greg Murphy, and Chuck Edwards were in the area yesterday talking about the ongoing relief efforts and storm damage as well as those community needs. It was also a topic on the vice presidential debate last night. I'll have that audio coming up for you in just a few minutes. The North Carolina State Board of Elections is continuing voting operations and strategizing how they're going to handle that in Western North Carolina following the impacts of Helene. Despite the storm's impact, election officials are ensuring the safety and the integrity of the upcoming election. During a State Board of Elections press conference yesterday, emergency measures were talked about, including rescheduling absentee board meetings, deploying emergency kits to affected counties, and assessing polling sites for damage. According to the executive director of the state board, Karen Brinson Bell, she said mountain people are strong, and the election people who serve them are resilient and tough. Just to go back to 2020, when we had an incredibly successful election with record turnout during the COVID pandemic, we've battled through hurricanes and tropical storms and still held safe and secure elections. We will do everything in our power to do so again. The North Carolina General Assembly, at least the House, is set to gavel back into session next week. You can imagine that there will be some direction potentially from leaders in the House as to a direction for the State Board of Elections, maybe additional funds put up for those western counties as they begin the process of conducting elections. I know that's a far way out, and obviously search and recovery missions are on everybody's mind as we sit here 34 days ahead of Election Day, early voting starting on October the 17th. Well, a strike is continuing this morning from the East Coast, from Maine all the way to Texas. It involves the International Longshoremen's Association, and it has affected over 36 U.S. ports, including 2 here in North Carolina, the Port of Wilmington and Port of Morehead City. In response to this, the North Carolina Port Authority has activated what they call their contingency plan. The strike stems from disputes over wage increases and automation protections in the shipping industry. The strike could disrupt the economy with concerns about potential supply chain issues as well as higher prices. All of this coming ahead of what is expected to be a very busy holiday shopping season as inflation has cooled in the last couple of months. The ports of Wilmington and Morehead City have implemented various restrictions on cargo handling until they say the situation is resolved. The impact will, of course, depend on the duration. We sit here day 2 this morning. President Joe Biden, under powers granted by the Taft-Hartley Act, could step in and order an 80-day cooling off period. That would at least temporarily halt the stoppage, though the president has given little indication that he will do so. As you can probably imagine, he might be willing to step in as impacts continue on the U.S. economy. Economists say that the port strike could cost the United States between $3 to $5 billion per day. We'll continue to track that here as the strike continues on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Taking a look at power outages out in the western half of North Carolina this morning, 350,000 people still without power. And while that is a decrease from the numbers that we saw yesterday morning, it appears that we might be reaching somewhat of a plateau. Those numbers were 377,000 on Tuesday. On Monday morning, it was over 470,000. So the power is beginning to turned on for some individuals. However, there is still a lot of work and a lot of infrastructure that has to be rebuilt. U.S. Senator Ted Budd talked about that infrastructure in Asheville yesterday.
This is absolutely unprecedented. Communications down, cell towers down. Just one of the mobile carriers had lost 303 towers. Within 24 hours, they had about half of those up and running. But they knew that they would hit a plateau because they get more and more difficult as they go into far reaches of western North Carolina.
The hurricane was also a topic during last night's vice presidential debate, J.D. Vance versus Tim Walz. J.D. Vance was asked a question about, climate change. He then started talking about the hurricane, the disaster, and the ongoing relief.
Because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today, actually, a photograph of two grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster.
That's J.D. Vance. Now Tim Walz.
It is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane, and my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused.
That audio from last night's CBS vice presidential debate. President Joe Biden will be in the state today. We'll have the latest details coming up for you on that tomorrow. Plus, UNC Chapel Hill has 34 times more registered Democrat professors than Republican. We'll be tracking those stories plus the news of the day coming up for you on a Thursday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. That's going to do it for this morning. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. Have a great day. We're back with you tomorrow morning at 5.
WBT AM Charlotte.
You're clear, brother.